Hello and welcome back to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video I'm going to be concentrating on London by William Blake, and this analysis is really quite awesome if we're thinking about it from the socio-political landscape alongside the historical influences that Blake as a romantic was up against. Now before I go any further, I want you to hit subscribe if you haven't already and join my tribe. What I'm hoping to do is share analytical awesomeness of all kinds, and linked down below are the other Blake poems I've covered, and I've also got playlists on romanticism and the like, which obviously he fits into. So this poem is an angry reaction to how industrialisation has impacted humanity and attitudes towards each other. This is far from a homage to the pride of this city as a cultural hub. It's a romantic response to the Industrial Revolution, as I say, but a very unconventional one. We might expect romantics like Blake to concentrate on beautiful fields or lambs, as he's done in previous poems, but in this particular one from Songs of Experience, this is all about describing the brokenness, the alienation, the imprisonment that urbanisation contributes towards, in terms of what it does for the poor who seem imprisoned by their poverty, and as a consequence their thoughts are crippled too. It's an attack on institutions and how they treat the individual, especially the vulnerable, and that attack on the institutions is really damning in every stanza in this poem. You might be thinking, well, why did he name it London? Well, it contextualises the city as a landscape for shame. It's definitely throwing shade, if you like, at what's going wrong in London. But it's also important that aside from the opening stanza where they reference the Thames, actually this could be any city. There are no other specific references. And in a way, this helps a reader generalise the experience of urban poverty across the country with other cities that are going through the aftermath and implications of more people moving to the city for work. So before we go into the analysis, I want you to have a look at the artwork that's on this screen. This is Blake's original work, The Songs of Innocence and Experience, with London drawn out and crafted and painted for us. I think we're really struck by the dingy nature of the street, and actually every image seems to be fueling the darkness and the light. And whilst this poem sheds light on London, that light is, as I say, shaming. So, let's get into reading. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear, how the youthful harlots curse, blast the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. So the structure of this 16-line poem is into 4 quatrains, with every other line of each stanza rhyming. And it also has iambic tetrameter, which is 8 beats per line. And that cyclical, repetitive, draining kind of rhythm and rhyme scheme contributes to offering us that repetitive drain of the evils of urban life that Blake is drawing our attention to. It's quite pertinent for us that the opening stanza is written in the first person, because that first person account of I wander helps reveal the isolation of city life for our poetic voice as the poem unravels. The repetition of chartered in lines 1 and 2 affirms the constraints that are placed by people, as chartered means space that is owned by someone. So it's the chartered street, and even the chartered Thames, which is ironic because, well, the Thames is surely free to flow, but even the Thames is owned, it would seem. The repetition also of mark or marks, the mark in every face, marks of weakness, marks of woe. It compounds for us that sense of suffering. Nothing is free. Even our poetic voice, who says in the opening line, "I wonder," well, we question that because there are marks everywhere. There are scars and repercussions of what so much constraint does for individuals. Are they really free is the central question of this poem. And the melancholy that's shared with weakness and woe reflects the brutality of urban life. I think it's fascinating how that structural rhyme for flow and woe between lines 2 and 4 offers us something. That sadness is induced when freedoms are curtailed. Now, as we move on to stanza 2, the semantic field of confinement is made all the more clear, and we understand that this poem is offering that urban life is the antithesis of freedom. If it wasn't already clear, it's made even more clear with the anaphoric emotive repetition of "in every cry, in every infant's cry, in every voice." There's a torturous proclamation here. And that semantic field of trauma through the senses of hearing just doesn't go away. There's a lot of crying in this stanza, a lot of fear. Children are scared. Men are crying out. Their voices are united. And equally, the determiner every is unrelenting. It's this notion that everybody is tortured. And that traumatic sense of manacles. You can hear the chains, but these are mind-forged manacles that our poetic voice hears. Society is imposing restrictions on people's minds. As such, it's like every ban, it's another constraint on the individual. And so this is a societal attack, but the restrictions that are bans are made by the law. But all voices are united on this idea that whether it's the chartered streets, whether it's the bans or the manacles, society metaphorically imprisons the individual. And it means that their cries, they're not worth much because nothing can change because of all these constraints that are offered and expected. As we move to stanza 3, this attack gets even more demanding because the attack is now directed towards powerful authority figures who we learn about by looking more closely at the poorest victims. The first victim we look at is the chimney sweeper who's crying. These would be very poor individuals, and often children did this lowly job to provide for their families. So we're getting a real sense of the suffering that's going on here. But as opposed to feeling safe within a church, actually the church is judging the chimney sweeper's cry. Every blackening church appalls. Appall is to be horrified, but the church is dirty. It's dirty because it should be the home for the lowly. It should be their place to feel safe. But instead, the soot and the dust represents the judgmental, grim, dark side of the church that is not there for the poorest of the poor. And then we move on to the hapless soldier's sigh. This is another victim, the hapless soldier. They're sighing because, well, their victim's state is made clear in the final line of that third stanza. There's something dark and ominous about the fact that it's not just the church that Blake is drawing reference to, it's now authority like the monarchy, it's the palace walls that the soldier's blood runs down, and also government by implication. So there's an attack on the idea that authority figures in the church, the government and the monarchy are hypocritical. They have comfort in other people's suffering, whether it's a soldier dying for a cause that Blake doesn't believe in, or the church that, in a way, keeps out the most vulnerable. And so there's a shifting in our imagery here. The soot blackens the church. The soldier's blood is on the palace walls. And whether the chimney sweep or the soldier are microcosmic representations of the masses who are as vulnerable and as poor, we definitely understand that the corruption of these institutions is only felt by the misfortunes of these poor victims. Now, as we swerve to the final stanza, we reach our climax, because here we learn of how the victims are making their own mind-forged manacles. And we take centre stage in the middle of the night to learn about a new life being born. It's quite a chilling thought, but most through midnight streets I hear. It's a chilling thought that it's when darkness arrives that we can hear these quite disturbing sounds that we're encountering in stanza 4. We learn of the misery of newborn life, brought into the world into poverty. And so here we learn of a baby born to a young prostitute who we can understand from this final stanza has an STI. I think there's something really grotesque in the image of the youthful harlot. A harlot was a prostitute, but the idea of a youthful harlot implies, well, could this prostitute be a child? That's so tragic and so tragic. But equally, alongside that, this prostitute is swearing at a newborn baby. We wonder, is that baby's mother the prostitute, or is it just another baby that the prostitute hears? But that lack of humanity, the idea that you would attack an infant in this way, is brutal. I think that lack of humanity stems from the idea we understand that this harlot is downtrodden. Visually, Blake draws our attention to infants and harlots. The harlot and the infant are both capitalised. And whilst the harlot speaks volumes to me of experience, the infant speaks of innocence, which is at the heart of this whole collection of songs of innocence and experience that Blake is shedding light for his readership. This is a damning statement of ruined opportunities. That baby's tear, we understand by the virtue of them being blasted and cursed at, is going to desensitise them. That innocent baby isn't going to stay innocent for long. And the blights with plagues. So it's almost implying that, if the plague is a venereal disease, an STI, well, that definitely offers this idea that the sexual or the marital hearse is, or could be, a space for regeneration or rebirth that's affected by this STI. But if marriage leads to a hearse being brought in, marriage leads to death. If love and desire lead to death and destruction, where is the hope in this scene? I suspect that Blake's priorities here are to shake us up about the impact of urbanisation in ways that register with our instincts. We're drawn to the sense of fear, the terror of this, and also the sensual engagement with our sounds and our hearing. I'd love for you to comment down below what you think Blake is trying to achieve within this poem. And also I'd love for you to consider it in light of the other poems that we've considered. What is he trying to share about urban life? And to what extent is this poem still relevant today? Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?